"Mom, get out of the house, don't turn on any lights. And whatever you do, don't go upstairs." I was standing barefoot in my kitchen at 12:17 in the morning when my son Daniel whispered those words into the phone. His voice was so quiet I could barely hear him. "Daniel, what happened?" I asked. He didn't answer. "Are you hurt?" Still nothing. Then he said, "You have less than 10 minutes. The call ended. I stared at the phone in my hand, trying to convince myself I had misunderstood him. Daniel never called me like that. He was my only son, and even though he had been distant lately, he still called every few days. But that night, something in his voice told me this wasn't about work. It wasn't about an argument. And it certainly wasn't a joke. I looked toward the dark hallway. The house was completely silent. No broken glass. No footsteps. No movement outside the windows. Everything looked exactly as it should. Then I noticed the light upstairs. It was on. I knew I had turned it off before going to bed. I took one slow step toward the staircase. And then I heard it. A floorboard creaked above me. I froze. Someone was upstairs. But that wasn't the part that frightened me most. The frightening part was realizing Daniel hadn't been warning me about someone coming into my house. He was warning me about someone who was already inside. The house had been mine for almost 30 years, but I had never really thought of it as just a house. It was where Thomas and I had raised our son Daniel. It was where Daniel had taken his first steps, where we had celebrated birthdays, Christmas mornings, and the ordinary evenings that seemed unimportant at the time. After Thomas died, I thought I would never be able to stay there alone. For months, every room reminded me of him. His chair beside the window, his old coffee mug in the kitchen cabinet, the faint smell of his aftershave that seemed to linger in the upstairs hallway long after he was gone. But eventually the house became my comfort. I was in my early 60s, a widow with one son who lived close enough to visit, but far enough away to have his own life. Daniel had always been protective of me. He called regularly, usually in the evening, and whenever he came over he would find some excuse to fix something that wasn't broken: a loose cabinet handle, a noisy door, a light bulb I hadn't noticed was flickering. Lately, though, something had changed. Daniel had become distant. His calls were shorter. His visits were less frequent. And strangely, he had started asking questions about the house. He wanted to know whether I still kept Thomas's old papers upstairs. He asked if the study was still locked. Then one evening, almost casually, he asked whether anyone else had a key. I laughed and told him he was being paranoid. But Daniel didn't laugh with me. He simply looked toward the staircase and said, "Mom, just make sure you never give that key to anyone." At the time, I thought he was talking about an old door. I had no idea he was talking about a secret my husband had taken to his grave. And I certainly didn't know that before the week was over, Daniel would call me at midnight and tell me to leave my own home. At 12:17 that night, my phone rang beside my bed. I almost didn't answer. When I saw Daniel's name on the screen, I felt a strange sense of relief. I thought perhaps he was finally calling to explain why he had been acting so strangely. Instead, the moment I answered, he whispered, "Mom, get out of the house." I sat up in bed. "What?" "Don't turn on any lights." His voice sounded different, not angry, not tired, afraid. "Daniel, what's happening? Just listen to me." I got out of bed and walked toward the bedroom door. Should I call the police? No. The answer came so quickly that it frightened me. "Not yet," he whispered. "Please trust me." I stood completely still. "Daniel, you're scaring me." There was a long silence on the other end. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. "Whatever you hear upstairs, don't answer." I looked toward the hallway. The darkness beyond my bedroom seemed deeper than usual. "What is upstairs?" He didn't respond. "Daniel, tell me what's going on." "Mom, you have less than 10 minutes. 10 minutes until what?" The line went silent. I checked the phone. The call had ended. For several seconds, I simply stood there holding it. Every sensible part of me told me to leave the house immediately, but another part of me needed to understand why. This was my home. The place where I had spent decades. The place Thomas had left me. I couldn't simply walk into the night without knowing what I was running from. Then I heard it. A soft sound above me, a slow creak, like someone had just stepped onto the upstairs floor. I stopped breathing. Another floorboard creaked. This time, I knew it wasn't the house settling. Someone was moving upstairs. I stayed beside the bedroom door, afraid to make even the smallest sound. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then another floorboard creaked upstairs. I remembered Daniel's warning. "Whatever you hear upstairs, don't answer." I slowly stepped into the hallway. The house was completely dark. I didn't turn on a single light. My bare feet felt cold against the wooden floor as I moved toward the staircase. Halfway there, I heard something again. A soft scrape, then silence. I looked up. The upstairs hallway was almost completely black, except for the faint light spilling from one room. The light I knew I had turned off. I took one step onto the stairs, then another. I could hear my own breathing. When I reached the top, I saw the door to Thomas's old study. Something moved beneath it. A shadow. I immediately stepped backward and pressed myself against the wall. Someone was inside. I thought about calling Daniel, but I was afraid even the sound of my phone might give me away. Then I noticed something that made even less sense. The front door downstairs was still locked. I had checked it before going to bed. I knew I had. I moved back downstairs and carefully checked every window. Locked. Every door. Locked. There was no broken glass. No sign anyone had forced their way inside. So how had someone gotten upstairs? I returned to the hallway. That was when I saw the footprints. Dark, muddy footprints crossed the floor. They started near the back entrance and continued toward the staircase. My heart began pounding. The person upstairs had been inside my house, and they had walked directly toward Thomas's study. I slowly climbed the stairs again. The footprints continued down the hallway, straight to the one room I had barely entered since my husband's death. Thomas's study. The door had always been locked, but now it wasn't. It stood slightly open, and from inside came the faint sound of something being moved. I reached for the handle, and suddenly understood why Daniel had been so afraid. Someone wasn't searching my house. They were searching for something Thomas had hidden. I pushed the study door open just enough to see inside. The room was empty. At least it looked empty. Thomas's old desk stood beneath the window, exactly where it had been for years. His books were still lined across the shelves. Boxes of papers sat untouched in the corner. Something was different. One of the desk drawers was open. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I searched the room. I remembered how Thomas used to spend hours in here. Whenever I asked what he was doing, he would smile and tell me it was nothing I needed to worry about. At the time, I believed him. Now I wondered how much he had kept from me. I opened the desk drawers one by one. Most contained ordinary things: receipts, old bank statements, pens, photographs. Then I noticed a small wooden panel beneath the desk. It wasn't part of the original furniture. I pressed against it. Nothing happened. Then I remembered something Thomas had once told Daniel when he was a boy. Some things only open when you know where to look. I searched the underside of the desk and found a tiny metal latch. The panel clicked. Behind it was a narrow compartment. Inside was an old envelope, a brass key, several documents, and 2 photographs. One photograph showed Daniel as a child. The other showed a man I had never seen before. I picked up the envelope. My name was written across the front in Thomas's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. There was only one page inside. I read the first few lines and felt the room suddenly become colder. Thomas had written about the house, about Daniel, and about a secret he believed might one day put me in danger. Then I reached the final paragraph. One sentence stopped me completely. If Daniel ever tells you to leave, believe him. I read it again, then a third time. My husband had been dead for years. Yet somehow, that letter made it feel as though he had known this night would come. I looked at the brass key in my hand, then at the photograph of the stranger, and finally at the locked cabinet beside Thomas's desk. For the first time, I understood. Daniel hadn't suddenly become afraid of my house. He had discovered something his father had been afraid of long before either of us knew there was anything to fear. I called Daniel again before I could lose my nerve. He answered almost immediately. "Mom?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "I found the letter," I said. There was silence. Then Daniel exhaled slowly. "Where are you?" "In your father's study." "Are you alone?" I looked toward the door. "I think so." "You think so?" His voice tightened. I told him about the hidden compartment, the photographs, and the key. When I mentioned the sentence Thomas had written about him, Daniel stopped me. "Mom, listen to me carefully." I waited. "My father left instructions after he died." "What kind of instructions?" "About you." My throat tightened. "What are you talking about?" Daniel told me that after Thomas's funeral, he had found a box among his father's belongings. Inside were records, old photographs, financial documents, and notes about someone who had been connected to our family for years. At first, Daniel thought it was simply an old business matter. Then he noticed something frightening. Someone had been watching the house. At first, it was small things: a car parked across the street, a gate left open, a photograph taken from a distance. Daniel had tried to investigate without frightening me, but the more he discovered, the less he understood whom he could trust. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "'Cause I didn't know if telling you would make you safer or put you in more danger." I looked down at the key in my hand. "Then why tonight?" Daniel was silent for several seconds. Finally, he said, "Because I found out they know you have the key." My heart dropped. "Who are they?" "I don't know. You're lying to me." "Mom, I'm trying to protect you. Then tell me what the key opens." Before Daniel could answer, something moved downstairs. I froze. "Daniel? What's wrong? I heard something." Then came a sound from the front of the house. The handle began to move, slowly. Someone was trying to open my front door. I gripped the phone tighter. Daniel's voice became urgent. "Mom, don't go downstairs." The handle moved again. And this time, I heard someone whisper from the other side. "Margaret." I stood at the top of the stairs with Daniel still on the phone. The voice downstairs had said my name. I knew that voice. Not because I heard it often. Because I had heard it once before, years ago. I looked at the photograph from Thomas's study again. The stranger's face suddenly felt familiar. Not completely, but enough to make my stomach turn. "Daniel," I whispered, "who is in that photograph?" He went quiet. "Mom, where did you find it?" "In your father's study." Another silence. Then Daniel said something I never expected. "That's Michael." "Who is Michael?" "He was my father's business partner." I stared at the photograph. Daniel explained that Thomas and Michael had been involved in a property deal decades earlier. But the deal had gone wrong. Money had disappeared, records had been altered, and Thomas had discovered that Michael had been using other people's names to move money through several properties. Thomas had threatened to expose him. Instead, Michael threatened Thomas. My hands began to shake. "Why didn't your father tell me?" "'Cause he thought keeping you out of it would protect you," Daniel continued. Thomas had secretly transferred ownership of one property into a protected account. The property was connected to our house, and the brass key opened a small safe containing the original documents. Michael had spent years trying to recover those documents. I looked toward the locked cabinet beside Thomas's desk. "So that's what he's looking for, yes, but why now?" Daniel's voice changed. "Because I found the safe, I closed my eyes." For years, I had believed Thomas's secrets were simply part of his private life. Now I understood he had been protecting our family from something much bigger. Then Daniel told me the part that hurt most. Michael had recently discovered that I still had access to the house, and he believed I had the key. The person downstairs wasn't there because he wanted the house. He wanted what Thomas had hidden inside it. I looked at the photograph one more time. Then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Behind Michael, standing beside him in the old picture, was a much younger man, Daniel. My son had known Michael since he was a child, and suddenly I understood why Daniel had been afraid to tell me everything. This wasn't just his father's secret anymore. It was a secret Daniel had been carrying for years. By the time Daniel reached the house, the police had already arrived. The person outside had disappeared before they got there, leaving only muddy footprints near the back entrance. I sat in the living room wrapped in a blanket, still holding Thomas's letter. When Daniel walked through the door, he looked exhausted. I had never seen my son look so afraid. He came straight toward me. "Mom, are you okay?" I nodded. Then I looked at him. "You knew." Daniel stopped. "You knew about all of this?" He lowered his eyes. "Yes." The answer hurt more than I expected. "You knew someone had been watching this house, and you let me sleep here alone? I was trying to protect you by lying to me? I didn't want you living every day afraid." I stood up. "Do you know what it feels like to hear someone trying your front door in the middle of the night?" Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "Yes." He paused. "Because I've been afraid of that happening to you since Dad died." He finally told me everything. After Thomas's death, Daniel had found the records. He had spent years quietly trying to understand what his father had been involved in. He had discovered Michael was still searching for the documents. And every time Daniel got close to the truth, someone seemed to know. "So you were investigating this all this time?" He nodded. "I didn't know who I could trust." I looked down at Thomas's letter. "Why didn't your father tell me?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Because he made me promise something." "What?" "To protect you." Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was another note from Thomas. My name was written on the front. Inside was a single sentence: "Daniel, if anything ever happens to me, keep your mother safe, even if she hates you for keeping the truth from her." I couldn't speak. For years, I had wondered why Daniel had become distant after his father's death. I had thought he was pulling away from me. I had been wrong. He hadn't been abandoning me. He had been carrying a promise that was never supposed to be his burden. I reached for his hand. "You should have told me, I know. And you should never have carried this alone. I know, Mom." For the first time that night, my son looked less like the frightened man who had called me at 12:17. He looked like the little boy Thomas had trusted to protect his mother, and I finally understood why he had made that desperate call. He wasn't trying to take my home away from me. He was trying to make sure I lived long enough to come home to it. The next morning, sunlight came through the kitchen windows as if nothing had happened. That almost made it harder. The same coffee maker sat on the counter. The same family photographs hung on the wall. The same staircase led toward Thomas's study. But I was no longer looking at the house the way I had before. For years, I had believed Thomas had left me a home. Now I understood he had also left me a truth. Daniel and I turned the documents over to the authorities. The records were enough to prove what Thomas had suspected years earlier. Michael had manipulated financial accounts and used the property to hide what he had done. The evidence also explained why he had spent so many years trying to recover the documents. He wasn't after my house. He was afraid of what the truth would expose. There were consequences. People lost money. Old relationships were damaged. And some questions about Thomas's decisions could never be answered. I had to accept that. Grief doesn't disappear simply because a secret finally has an explanation. A few weeks later, Daniel came back to the house. We sat together at the kitchen table. For a while, neither of us said anything. Then I looked at him. "You should have trusted me," he nodded. "I know. That I should have trusted you enough to believe you were trying to protect me." He reached across the table and took my hand. "I wasn't asking you to leave because I didn't want you there, Mom." His voice broke slightly. "I was asking you to leave because I couldn't lose you to." Those words stayed with me. I had spent so much time being hurt by his silence that I had forgotten to ask what had caused it. Daniel hadn't been keeping me in the dark because he didn't care. He had been standing in the dark himself, trying to find a way to keep me safe. Eventually, I unlocked Thomas's study. Not because I wanted to live among secrets, because I was finally ready to stop being afraid of them. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt honest. Thomas had kept something from me. Daniel had kept something from me. But both had been trying, in their own imperfect ways, to protect the same person, me. And for the first time since my husband's death, I understood that the house was never the secret. The secret was the truth connected to it. And sometimes the truth doesn't destroy a family. Sometimes finally facing it gives a family the chance to begin again. Grief has a strange way of changing the way we see people. After Thomas died, I thought I understood everything about our marriage. I thought I knew the man I had shared my life with. But I learned that even the people closest to us can carry things they don't know how to explain. And sometimes silence looks like betrayal when it is actually fear. Daniel's silence had hurt me, but so had my own assumptions. I had assumed that because he wasn't telling me everything, he didn't trust me. The truth was that he was terrified of losing me. He was trying to protect me with the only tools he had, and he made mistakes. So did I. Maybe that's what families do. We love each other. We worry about each other. We keep secrets because we think we're protecting the people we love. And sometimes those secrets create the very distance we're trying to prevent. I still live in that house. Thomas's study is no longer locked. I keep the old photographs there now. Not because I want to remember the secrets, but because I want to remember everything that came after them. The fear, the truth, the forgiveness, and the moment my son and I finally understood each other again. For years, I thought the most frightening thing about that night was hearing my son tell me to leave my own home. I was wrong. The frightening part was learning why he had waited so long to warn me, because some warnings arrive too late to save us from the past. But sometimes they arrive just in time to save the people we still have. Thank you for spending this evening with me at Lantern House. If this story touched you, stay a while. There are many more by the fire.